Something pretty incredible is happening right now, deep inside the vaults of the world's most powerful banks. There's a silent gold rush going on. And no, this isn't just another market trend. It's more like a quiet rebellion against the way our money has worked for decades. So let's dig in and figure out what's really driving this massive move. This quote from The Island absolutely nails it. See, this isn't about the gold in your jewelry box. We're talking about a high-stakes global game, and gold has become a key strategic piece on the board. It's acting like a shadow currency for countries that are trying to protect themselves in a world that feels more and more unstable. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the jaw-dropping numbers behind this new gold rush. Then, we'll examine why the whole dollar system is kind of creaking at the seams. We'll pinpoint the one event that really lit a fire under everyone, see how the rest of the world is scrambling to respond, and finally, we'll tackle the big one. What does this all mean for the future of money? Okay, first things first, let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what's happening. We're not talking about a little blip on the radar here. This is a full-blown seismic shift. Just look at that number, 1,045 tons. That's how much gold central banks around the world bought up in 2024. But here's the really wild part. It's the third year in a row they've bought over 1,000 tons. To give you some perspective, that's more than double the average pace they were buying at for the entire last decade. This is not a coincidence, my friends. This is a very deliberate, very massive stockpiling effort. So the big question is why? Why the sudden shopping spree? Well, to answer that, we need to look at the foundations of our global financial system. Because honestly, some serious cracks are starting to show. An analyst named Zoltan Pozsar has a brilliant way of looking at this. He says there are two kinds of money, inside money and outside money. Inside money is basically an IOU. Think of bank deposits or government bonds. Their value is totally based on a promise that someone will pay you back. Then you have outside money. This is the real stuff, things you can physically hold, like gold. There's no promise needed, no counterparty risk. The huge takeaway from Pozsar's idea is that the world is quickly losing faith in those IOUs and scrambling to get its hands on physical stuff instead. And this chart makes that difference crystal clear. On one side, you have things like US Treasury bonds. They're the bedrock of the whole system, but they're still just a promise. Their value is based on trust. On the other side, a gold bar. Its value is based on physics. It just is. It's not a promise from anybody. For a long, long time, the dollar being the world's top currency has been a bit of a double-edged sword. Sure, for the US, it means cheaper imports and lower interest rates. But the downside is that it makes American exports way more expensive, which has really hurt manufacturing. And for every other country, they're forced to hold dollars just to participate in global trade. It basically ties their entire economic fate to a system they have zero control over, and a lot of them are starting to think that's a pretty raw deal. So the system was already feeling a bit shaky, but then one single event happened that took all that theoretical risk and made it terrifyingly real. It shattered the very trust that was holding the entire inside money system together. This timeline really tells the whole story. It started back in '71, when the US cut the dollar loose from gold. At that point, it became pure inside money, backed by nothing but faith. But the real earthquake hit in 2022, when Western nations froze Russia's dollar reserves. It sent a shockwave around the world. The message was loud and clear. Your dollar assets can be taken away. They are not safe from politics. And that one move completely changed the game for every central bank on earth. Okay, so if you're a country watching all this unfold, and you suddenly realize your savings can be used as a weapon against you, what do? How do you respond to that new reality? You respond by buying a whole lot of physical gold. I mean, this chart says it all, doesn't it? Just compare the average buying before 2022 to the explosion in buying since. The numbers don't lie. This is a massive, coordinated, global pivot away from promises and toward hard assets. In a world of digital risks and political chess moves, countries just want something real. It's the same principle behind why the US Treasury puts these official audit seals on its own gold bars. They want something they can see, touch, and verify is actually there. Something that can't be frozen or erased with the click of a button by another government. But let's be clear, gold isn't some magic fix for everything. Just look at Zimbabwe. They tried to launch a gold-backed currency recently, but the public was deeply skeptical. Why? Because decades of economic chaos had completely destroyed their trust in the government. It's a powerful reminder that even a pile of gold can't repair a broken foundation of trust. So all of this brings us to the final, multi-trillion-dollar question. In our super complex, digital, and divided world, can an ancient metal really be the answer to our problems? Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, what about Bitcoin? Isn't that supposed to be digital gold? And that's a great question. But when you really stack them up against each other, you see some huge differences. Gold has a 6,000-year history as a store of value. It just exists. It doesn't need electricity or the internet. Bitcoin is a technology. It's amazing, but it depends entirely on a complex network to function. If interest in that network fades, its value could literally go to zero. A bar of gold, on the other hand, will always be a bar of gold. So here we are. Central banks across the globe are making a massive bet. They're trading in promises for physics. They're betting that in a fracturing world, the ultimate safe haven isn't a line of code or political agreement, but an ancient, unfreezable metal. The big question for all of us is, are they right? Let me know what you think in the comments. Is this a smart move or a step backward? I'd love to hear your take. And if you got some value out of this today, do me a favor and hit that like button.
Wow, that was something, right? But don't go anywhere, there's more coming, and it's gonna make you think in a whole new way. Quick reminder, if you like learning cool stuff without the fluff, subscribe now. You won't regret it.
Listen to this. It is hard for us to even see a scenario that would see us losing $1 on any of those transactions. You know who said that? That was Joseph Cassano, the head of AIG's Financial Products Division, back in August of 2007. And, less than a year later, his division didn't just lose $1, it completely imploded. It triggered one of the biggest government bailouts in American history. I mean, wow. If you want a perfect snapshot of the incredible, almost dangerous overconfidence right before the entire global financial system went off a cliff, well, that's it right there. Welcome everyone to the Violet Vault. Today we are going to tackle one of the biggest, most important economic events of our lifetime, the 2008 financial crisis. We're going to pull it apart piece by piece to really understand what happened. I mean, the big question is, right? How did a system that everyone, and I mean everyone, thought was rock solid, totally safe, how did it manage to shatter so spectacularly? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Let's dive in. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the illusion of safety, kind of the calm before the storm. Then we'll get into a house of cards to see the hidden flaws. After that, we'll watch as the dominoes fall. And finally, we'll look at the sobering aftermath to see what it all meant. All right, let's get into section 1, the illusion of safety. To really get a grip on why the crash was so shocking, you first have to understand the world that came right before it, a world that felt almost unshakably stable. So for about 25 years, all the way from the early 80s up to 2007, the global economy was just humming along. Economists actually had a name for it. They called it the Great Moderation. And it makes sense, right? Growth was steady, inflation was super low. The general feeling, the common belief, was that the experts, the Fed, the government, had finally figured it out. Like they'd cracked the code and tamed the wild beast of the economy's booms and busts. It honestly felt like major recessions were a thing of the past, something you'd just read about in history books. Okay, and this right here, this is the absolute key to understanding the whole thing. The belief, the story everyone was telling themselves, was that we'd mastered risk, that it was basically engineered out of the system. But the reality was so different. The risk didn't just disappear into thin air. No way. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. It just squeezed out and found a new place to go. It moved into the shadows, into this super complex, unregulated corner of the financial world where almost nobody was paying attention. Okay, so now for section 2, a house of cards. Let's really pull back the curtain here. What was this so-called financial fortress actually built on? As you're about to see, it was nothing more than a house of cards, ready to topple at the slightest breeze. So right at the very center of this whole mess was something called a subprime mortgage. And the idea was actually pretty simple. Let's give home loans to people with, not so great credit, folks who normally wouldn't qualify. The banks figured the higher interest rates made it worth the risk. But see, the entire system, everything that was built on top of this, rested on one gigantic, and as it turns out, totally fatal assumption that home prices would just keep going up forever. So you might be asking, how on earth did they hide all this risk? Well, this is where Wall Street got really creative. It gets a little complicated, but stick with me. Here's the core idea. Step 1, investment banks bought up thousands of these risky subprime loans. Step 2, they bundled them all together into a new product, a mortgage-backed security or RMBS. You can think of it like a big fruit basket, but instead of fruit, it's full of mortgages. But they didn't stop there. For step 3, they took those baskets, sliced them into different pieces, and then rebundled those pieces into new, even more complicated products called CDOs. And here's the final trick, step 4. The credit rating agencies, the supposed umpires of the financial world, gave these things their highest possible safety rating, AAA. We're talking the same rating they give to US government bonds. It was like financial alchemy, turning lead into gold, or more accurately, turning junk into treasure. On paper, at least.
And look at this. This is an actual internal email from an analyst at S&P, one of the big rating agencies. Let's hope we are all wealthy and retired by the time this house of cards falters. It could be structured by cows, and we would rate it. I mean, just let that sink in. It's incredible, right? It shows that the people on the inside, the very people whose job it was to stamp these things as safe, they knew. They knew it was a joke. They knew the models were broken and the products were basically junk. But hey, the fees were just too good, and nobody wanted to be the one to stop the music.
Okay, so we have a ticking time bomb. Now, let's pour some gasoline on it. That's exactly what leverage did. See, these big investment banks weren't just playing with their own money. Oh no, they were borrowing massive amounts of money to make their bets even bigger. And this number here, 30-1, it's just staggering. It means for every single dollar of their own capital, they were borrowing and investing 30 more. Now, when things are going up, that's amazing. The profits are huge. But the flip side? It meant that a tiny dip in their investments, just a few percentage points, could wipe them out completely. The potential for profit was enormous, but the risk, well, it was literally off the chart.
So where was all this crazy stuff happening? Well, it wasn't happening at your traditional Main Street bank where you have your checking account, the ones that are heavily regulated. Nope. This was all happening in the shadow banking system. And that's a perfect name for it. It's this vast, murky network of investment banks, hedge funds, and all these other financial players operating with way, way less oversight. We're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar blind spot in the global economy.
Okay, here we go. Section 3, the dominoes fall. So at this point, we're at the breaking point. The whole system is incredibly fragile, it's all interconnected, and it's leveraged up to the absolute limit. It was perfectly primed for what one economist, Hyman Minsky, called a Minsky moment. And that's just a fancy term for the exact point when a long period of good times and wild speculation suddenly collapses under its own weight, and pure panic takes over. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It was more like a series of shocks. The first tremor, the first real sign of trouble, hit in August 2007 when a French bank froze some of its funds. Then the ground really started to shake in March 2008 when the huge investment bank Bear Stearns just collapsed. But the big one, the earthquake that brought the entire global system to its knees, that was in September 2008 when the government let Lehman Brothers fail. The moment that happened, it triggered absolute full-blown panic all around the world.
I love this quote because it's the perfect way to describe what happened next. Pure financial contagion. It's much like the vortex in a bathtub when the stopper is pulled. All of a sudden, nobody knew who was holding all this bad debt. And if you don't know who's safe and who's not, you don't trust anyone. So what happened? Banks just stopped lending to each other overnight. And you have to understand, credit is the absolute lifeblood of the modern economy, and it just froze solid. The entire global financial system basically went into cardiac arrest.
So what happens when the whole system just breaks? That brings us to our final section, the sobering aftermath. Let's take a look at the legacy of this meltdown and the long shadow it still casts over all of us, even today. The cost was just staggering. $20 trillion. It's a number so big, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. But that's the estimated value that just evaporated from people's homes and their stock market accounts in the US alone. And we have to remember, for millions of families, this wasn't some abstract number on a screen. This was their home. This was their retirement savings. This was their kids' college fund. It was their entire future gone.
And the response? Well, it had to be just as massive as the crash itself. We saw these enormous government bailouts for the biggest banks and for AIG. We got sweeping new financial regulations like the Dodd-Frank Act, designed to prevent this from ever happening again. The economy itself changed, with lower expectations for growth for years to come, and a huge increase in public debt. But, maybe the biggest, most lasting consequence of all was a deep, fundamental loss of trust. Trust in our financial institutions and trust in the people who run them. And so all of this, it leaves us with a really critical question, doesn't it? The crisis revealed these deep, deep flaws in our financial system. It was such a painful lesson about complexity, about hidden risk, and about the dangers of believing things are stable just because they've been stable for a while. Now, sure, we've put new rules in place, new safeguards are there, but the real question is, and this is something I want you to really think about, is the system today truly any safer? Or have we just gotten smarter about finding new shadows to hide the risk in? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a like and subscribe for more.
Wow, that was something, right? But don't go anywhere, there's more coming, and it's gonna make you think in a whole new way. Quick reminder, if you like learning cool stuff without the fluff, subscribe now. You won't regret it.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Violet Vault. Today we're going to talk about something we all use every single day, probably without even thinking about it: money. But, the very idea of what money is, well, it's changing fast. It's shifting from that cash you can hold in your hand to basically a stream of data. And that one little change, it could have huge consequences that we're only just starting to wrap our heads around.
So let's just jump right in with a big question that's going to frame everything we talk about today. What if your money came with rules? I mean, actual rules attached to every dollar and cent in your account. Rules about where you can spend it, when you can spend it, and maybe even if you're allowed to spend it at all. Now, I know that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but believe me, it's the central question we have to ask as we go deeper and deeper into this digital post-cash world. To really get why this is such a big deal, you have to look at the basic DNA of money. Think about physical cash. A $20 bill, right? It's got 3 key features. It's private, it's anonymous, and it's what we call permissionless. When you hand that 20 to someone, nobody else has to know, and importantly, nobody can stop you. But digital currency, it's the complete opposite. Every transaction is traceable, it's recorded forever, and it's permissioned. That means some middleman, like a bank, has to give it the okay. And that simple fact brings us to our first really big idea today. This shift from a physical thing to a digital record means that money is, for all intents and purposes, becoming data. Just let that sink in for a second. In a world with no cash, every single thing you do with your money, buying your morning coffee, paying your bills, donating to a cause you believe in, every single one of those actions creates a digital footprint, a permanent, observable record of your life that can be stored and analyzed. This transformation is the bedrock for everything else we're going to get into. So, okay, if our money is now just data, who gets to write the rules for that data? That question, right there, leads us straight to the new systems of financial control that are being built on top of this digital foundation. The first piece of this puzzle is something called anti-money laundering regulations, or AML for short. Now, on the surface, it sounds like a great idea, right? The goal is to stop criminals from using banks to hide their dirty money. And to do this, banks are required by law to basically act as financial police, constantly watching what their customers are doing and flagging anything they think is suspicious. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. What's the price tag for all this? Well, in the UK alone, it costs banks a mind-blowing £34 billion every single year just to comply with these rules. To put that in perspective, that's literally double what the country spends on policing all other crimes combined. And you can bet that cost doesn't just disappear. It gets passed right down to us, the customers. So you have to ask, right, for that unbelievable cost, what's the benefit we're all getting? Well, according to the research from the Institute of Economic Affairs, there is, get this, no evidence that these incredibly expensive rules actually do anything to reduce crime. A massive, massive bill for a result that apparently doesn't even exist. Okay, let's look at the second piece of this new architecture: social credit systems. We've probably all heard bits and pieces about China's system. At its heart, it's a way to score citizens, but not just on whether they pay their bills on time. It's about their total civic trustworthiness. Behave in a way the system likes, you get rewards. Behave in a way it doesn't, you get punished. Now, to really understand how massive this is, let's compare it to something we're all familiar with, like a FICO credit score here in the States. Your FICO score has a very limited job. It measures your financial risk, and it pretty much only affects your ability to get a loan or a credit card. But a social credit score? Whoa. It's totally all-encompassing. It's judging your character, your social choices, your political leanings, and it can affect every single part of your life, from whether you can buy a plane ticket to what kind of jobs you can even apply for. And that brings us to the third tool, and this one might be the most powerful of all: the central bank
digital currency, or CBDC. You can think of this as the government's official version of digital money. So instead of your money being held at a commercial bank like Chase or Bank of America, it would be held directly with the country's central bank, like the Federal Reserve.
The one word you absolutely have to understand here is programmability. Because the CBDC comes straight from the government can build rules right into the money itself. Imagine getting a stimulus payment that has an expiration date. You have to spend it by Friday or it just vanishes. Or imagine money that simply won't work if you try to buy something they don't want you to buy, like too much gasoline, or funds that can't be donated to certain political groups. That is the incredible power of programmable money. And please, don't think this is just some far-off theoretical idea. It is happening right now. According to the Bank of International Settlements, a full 80% of the world's central banks are already deep into researching or even running pilot programs for their own CBDCs. This isn't a fringe idea. It is a full-blown global trend. Okay, so far, we've been talking about the tools and the big ideas. Now, let's see what happens when the rubber meets the road. What does this look like when these systems are actually put into practice in the real world? This brings us to a phenomenon people are calling debanking. A really famous case was that of the British politician Nigel Farage. His bank, Coutts, just decided to close his account, and this quote from an internal bank memo that later got leaked is just, wow, it's so revealing. They didn't close his account because of any financial crime. They closed it because, as they put it, his publicly stated values didn't align with the bank's values. And that's the core of it. Debanking isn't about you breaking the law. It's about a private company deciding you're too risky or too much of a hassle to deal with, often because of those burdensome AML rules we talked about. Or, like in Farage's case, it can just be about your political opinions. In a society that's moving away from cash, losing your bank account is like becoming a non-person. You're basically cut off from the economy. For an even bigger example, look at what happened with the Canadian Freedom Convoy protests back in 2022. This timeline just shows how fast things can move. Protesters raised millions of dollars through crowdfunding. Then, the government invoked a National Emergencies Act. The very next day, they used that power to order banks to freeze the accounts, not just of the protesters on the ground, but of people who had simply donated as little as $25 to their cause. All of it done without a court order. And this right here, this is how it works under the hood. There are rules on the books, like the one you see here, that force banks and other financial companies to basically become extensions of government surveillance. They require them to keep all these detailed records, specifically so they can be handed over to the authorities, effectively deputizing the entire financial system as an arm of state control. So all of this brings us to our final section. Let's zoom out and ask the big question. What is the ultimate trade-off here? What is the price we might all have to pay for this new world? You know, when you start connecting the dots, the disappearance of cash, the burden of AML rules, the idea of social credit, and the rise of CBDCs, the trend is it's undeniable. We are moving away from a system that allowed for privacy and personal autonomy, and we're heading towards a system built on surveillance, traceability, and the potential for a level of top-down control we've never seen before. The folks at the Cato Institute put it so well with this quote. Privacy isn't something that powerful institutions, governments, or giant corporations are just going to give us out of the goodness of their hearts. Frankly, all their incentives point in the other direction, towards collecting more data and having more control. The argument here is that privacy is something that has to be actively built and actively defended. And so we end up right back where we started, with a question for you to think about. As we watch the last dollar bills and the last coins slowly fade away, who gets to set the terms and conditions for your wallet? Who writes the rules for your money? The answer to that question is going to define what financial freedom looks like for all of us, for generations to come. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments, what's the one thing from this that's sticking with you the most? Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you for spending time with us here at the Violet Vault. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay focused and keep growing.